Today we're going to be talking about the behavioral of mastery because a lot of people, every time that I sit and do a leadership course, and then I say, so what makes a good leader? I get 6 million different answers because the truth is there isn't one particular way or attribute. So, what we need to be looking at rather than saying, oh, what makes a good leader is let's look at the behavior because behavior creates results. How I am, how I wake up, how I feel about myself, my day, my business, the future, the government, all of that will create a behavior as a result of what I believe and as a result of what I think is what's going to give me an outcome. So leadership. So when we look again back at leaderships, they are shaped by behavior, but not motivation. So a lot of people think, oh, leader needs to be really motivated. They need to be inspiring. They need to be. If you are not those things already, you cannot motivate and inspire your team because your behavior is what's going to inspire them. So we always have to ask ourselves as leaders, how am I showing up? And when I look at how I'm showing up, I have to ask myself, what has to be true inside of me to show up this way? So it's a completely different thing because people always ask me, how do I become? Or I've had managers say that in the next 6 months working with you, I want you to change me and make me. And I go, I can't change you, but I can change the way you feel about yourself and see yourself because that will then shape your behavior and then that will become the way that you show up. So behavior is a learned response. I know it's obvious and yet a lot of people don't realize that. So one of the things that I always see is that, for instance, parents will say to a child, oh, stop being so stupid. In other words, you are stupid, stop doing that. Um, what is wrong with you? You are so naughty. And all of these things that happen in a time in our lives where we don't have experience and we don't have reference, and therefore parents, and I'm not saying that parents are doing this because they are evil, but parents do this, teachers do this, peers do this, where they actually attack our identity and they make our behavior be our identity. And here's the thing, who you are as a person is perfect, is exquisite, is worthy, is enough. The behavior can be questioned. Having said that, every behavior has a purpose. Every behavior has a way and a reason and a motivation of why it's there. And every behavior fits in the most ideal place. Yet this behavior might not fit in somewhere else. So what do I mean by that? You can look at, say, a cool dude, dudess, whatever, and she behaves or he behaves in a way that is very trendy, and it's like how the kids talk to each other, and it's like, hey, dude, and is this and is that, and the cap on the side. And that fits in that sort of scenario. But that same behavior, if, say, somebody is trying to get a banking job or a finance job and is also doing that, they have to work really hard to prove themselves that somebody will take them seriously because there are sort of, people expect you to, for instance, wear a suit or speak in a certain way or behave in a certain way. So the privilege of doing what you want as you want and dressing as you want only comes once you've proved to yourself and to your peers that what's in your head has got no reflection to your dressing. So you've got to look at your behavior and see if that behavior fits in. But behavior is not identity. And when we can separate identity and behavior, we can look at ourselves and saying, how can I do this differently rather than how do I change me? Because how do I change me is a lot harder than how do I change this behavior. So when we're looking at ourselves and we're looking at our teams, we can talk about behaviors, but not identity. So identity, like I said, this isn't who you are, but it's how you've learned to respond. I worked for many years with Dr. Richard Bandler, who's the co-creator of NLP, and Paul McKenna in all the NLP Prax, Master Prax Train the Trainer events in London. And one of the things that Richard always said was that if you've learned to do something, that means you can learn to undo it and do something else. In other words, you weren't born with an automatic, permanent kind of way of being. You've learned to be this way, which means that you can unlearn it and then you can learn to be something else. And something that is very good now with neuroplasticity and neuroscience having taken sort of so much progress is that and especially in the 80s and the 90s, there was a huge myth that once you got to the age of 35, your brain was set in stone, it was formed, it was done, and you couldn't change because a leopard can't change its spots. So it is who you are, and that's just the way it is. Nowadays, they're going, well, that's not so true because the physical brain takes about until the age of 35 to fully develop, but the neuroplasticity now gives us the luxury and the ability to change anything about us. So we have now discovered how we've created our identities, how we've created the behaviors, the response, the reactions, and now we know how we can undo this and do something different. So what has been a learned response? This is not you're not stuck with this forever. So what I do when I work with leaders, I look to see how they behave under pressure, because under pressure, the unconscious mind kicks in, the unconscious patterns take over, and therefore we act in the way that we cannot defend. So a lot of the time, I remember working with a manager, and they wanted to promote her to become a senior manager. And when I said to them, so why don't you just promote her? Why do you need me to work with her for 6 months? And they said, well, she's not very confident, but she's really good at her job. When I went to start talking to her, it turns out what she told me in confidence is that she didn't think that she actually was good enough for the job, but she was able to mask that insecurity that she had and therefore fool everybody into thinking that she was good enough. And when I asked her, how long have you been doing that? So, how long have you been fooling everybody and masking how good or not good you are? She said to me, 10 years. And I just turned around and started laughing. And I said, well, you must be bloody good at what you're doing. And she goes to me, what do you mean? I said, well, to fool everybody for 10 years, that takes something. So, it's interesting how under pressure, all that we are gets revealed. So, when I asked her, how do you work under pressure? She was like constantly stressed. So she would be holding it together, but she would be falling apart on her way home. She would be falling apart at home. She wasn't sleeping well. She was a physical wreck because of the way that she was constantly trying to hold herself together. For the same token, I've also seen people that are very cool, calm, and collected, and they're looking all confident, and then something goes wrong and they lose their shit. They are like screaming and shouting, and everybody's like, whoa, what's happened here? So it's always interesting to see what happens under pressure because that's where we get revealed because we can't hold it. It's almost like a time bomb going off, and that's where we see it. So the big question is, what creates a good leader? When we look at things like, okay, so this is behavior and his background, and we all have different backgrounds, different cultures, different times in life that we've been born. Some is the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, So what makes a good leader? What is the recipe? And again, this is something that I always ask when I teach leadership. And it's interesting what people think, and it's always something that is outside rather than what is inside. So there is no one definition. However, awareness changes the game in every situation. And this is the biggest thing that I do. I have a method that is called AIR, which is bring awareness, interrupt a pattern that's not working, and rewire to create a different behavior, a different personality, really. Because if you think about it, your personality, so this is something to go, okay, my personality creates your personal reality. Look at it from somebody else's point of view. We can see if somebody's confident or anxious or lacking confidence. Oh, hold on, somebody wants to come in. There we go. So we can always see how somebody feels about themselves by the way they speak, the way they stand, the way they talk, the way they move. So when we become aware of ourselves, we can see what needs to change. We can always ask ourselves that intelligent question. Oops, let me just. So how do we develop the parts of us that needs to change so that we can get the best outcomes for the job that we have, for the business that we've got, for the outcomes that we want? We have to understand ourselves and what is our triggers. The very first book that I wrote is called I Understand Me, which, by the way, is available on Kindle Unlimited. So, go and grab it if you're interested. But I wrote that book because every time I started working with somebody, I first had to take 2 or 3 sessions to explain to them how they, as people, as human beings, behave, because we are all human. Now, the interesting thing is that as human beings, we all do certain things, but the way that we do them, the ratios that we do them, the triggers of when we do them, that's what makes us unique. So when we start to understand who we are and what triggers us, then we start to develop, because then we are putting ourselves into a space of awareness and so awareness and choice of how do I want to be. Right. So how do we do that? How do we start developing and understanding ourselves? Oops, let me just go here. Who are you under pressure? Always look to see when things go south. What do I do? How do I behave? How do I think? Because how I think will then translate in how I behave. What is it that triggers me? Because you can see that some things trigger you, it won't trigger somebody else. Equally so, you'll see somebody else losing it, and then you're thinking, what's the big deal? Why are they doing that? When does your ego feel bruised? So I've seen this so many times in meetings where people will ask a question, and sometimes it's the way they ask the question, and sometimes it's just they're asking a question for more clarity. And instead of the leader, the manager, the person that's leading the meeting will then answer, they almost take it like, I'm being attacked. That's why I'm being asked. And there's a lot of things that we can say that, yes, maybe the information isn't clear because they are not clear, but they don't want to let everybody else know that they're not clear. And therefore, they feel attacked when somebody's going, hey, you're not making sense. So you've got to ask yourself, when do I feel that my ego is being bruised, that I'm not being appreciated, I'm not being, people are taking me for granted, people are not being grateful for what I'm doing or the contributions I'm doing. When does your ego feel bruised? How secure are you in yourself? So again, I see this a lot in leadership, where leaders are threatened by their team, that if somebody's smarter or better or quicker, they might take their jobs. Where actually a leader is not supposed to be able to do everything. A leader is supposed to manage and coordinate and have the vision that they then give to their team to deliver. So, how do you see your team? This is actually a really interesting one, because I will ask leaders, so, what do you think is happening in your team? Oh gosh, they are dysfunctional, they are not productive, they are taking the piss, they are this. Or I get it on every single leadership training when I start, because I ask these questions just so that I can gauge what's going on. And I will ask them this question, and I say to them, here's the thing. Every morning, your team gets up when the alarm goes off, and they go and shower and they get dressed and they want to look nice. So I appreciate that in different sectors and different sort of job places, maybe dress code is more flex, more relaxed nowadays. But even so, people want to feel good in the way they are. They will make their coffee, they'll brush their teeth, they come to work because they've got a job, they've got a passion, they've got something that they're developing, a career that they are developing into. They've got a family to provide, they've got their own lives to provide, they've got things that they've got their dreams, their aspirations. So the question that I ask leaders is, do you think that while your team member is getting ready for work, brushing their teeth, drinking a cup of coffee, they're sitting there thinking, how can I irritate my boss today? What can I do that will piss them off and irritate the hell out of them? Do you think that that's what's going on? And a lot of them will burst out laughing and they go, well, it feels like that. And I go, well, if somebody's behaving that way, it's your job as a leader to step back and go, what's happening with this person for them to behave in this way? Because people don't behave this way because they're trying to sabotage their lives. They're not behaving this way because they're trying to irritate their boss who's paying their salary that makes them have a life. There's something going on. Maybe priorities are not right. I mean, I talk a lot about motivation, even the motivation, we're looking external, internal motivation. But usually, if somebody is exactly where they want to be, in other words, what they're doing pays the bills, they live the life that they want, they're able to do the things that they want, and all that, they might not have the motivation to get more. You'll get other people that want more, even though what they've got is enough. However, when something changes in somebody's life, like maybe they meet somebody, maybe they're moving in with their partner, maybe they're getting divorced, or maybe they are moving towns or whatever, but something changes and suddenly what they've got is not enough. At that point, they will then push themselves to do for more. So when I ask people, like, so when is it that you change? Is it, I know what I want and therefore I'm going for it? But most people will say, I don't know what I want, or I know what I want, but I don't know how to get it. And therefore they stay where they are. So if people are not behaving the way they should, there's something going on. And as a leader, you need to be able to see that and go and have that conversation with your team member and find out what's going on because they're not there. They haven't woken up that morning thinking, how can they irritate their boss today? So leaders are emotional reference points. How the leader is, if a leader is confident, relaxed, knowing that whatever issues come up, we will solve it. It'll be okay. It teaches everybody else to be okay about it too. It's a little bit like if you look at children, and I appreciate that, you're not working with children, but the behaviors are very, very similar. And very often leaders go, well, I'm not a psychologist, and why am I supposed to know these things? And I'm going, well, when you accept a management or a leadership role, you have to also accept that part of your role is to grow people. It is part of what leaders do. You inspire and you grow people to become the best version of themselves. You've got to show them, not by telling them, but by leading the way, by showing them how to do it. So if, for instance, if you look at a child and they drop something and it breaks or it spills, the first thing that they do is they look up to their parent to like, am I in trouble? Is this going to be a problem? Am I going to be punished? Am I going to be told off? And you can see that anticipation and fear in a child's face when something like this happens. And it's the parent's job to go, it's okay. Nothing happened. You just dropped something and we've made a mess and we're going to clean it up together. It's okay. I'm going to show you how to clean it. And then things can calm down. In much the same way, your team members will make mistakes because that is normal, natural way of growing any business. We learn, we try things out and things go wrong and then we figure out different ways. But if they get addressed with shouting, screaming, or stress and all of that, then they kind of learn that I can't tell my boss when I've done something wrong or when something's not working or when I don't know what to do because I don't want to be told off. Nobody wants to be told off. Nobody wants to be in an environment where they're scared to make mistakes. So we have to, as leaders, look at our emotional way of being because that is a reference point for the team. So your internal state will set the tone whether you intend to or not. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't know and don't realize. Stress is contagious because stress is a chemical that goes from your hypothalamus into your through your nervous system into your body to tell the body how to behave. And therefore, there's like pheromones that come out of us that we breathe out and, through the sweat pores and all that. And people will inhale them. If people are unconscious and are taking your stress signals, they will start being stressed for reasons they don't understand, or they'll be anxious, or they'll be angry, or whatever it is. So, this is why when you are a very, very conscious and positive kind of person, and I'm not putting positive as in like, every day in every way, my life's better and better, truly positive inside because of who you are. When you are in the company of negative people, it becomes very uncomfortable for you because you are so aware of this kind of thing. Whereas the unconscious people, which unfortunately is most of people, they don't realize that that's going on and they kind of become part of the party. So teams respond to state and not instructions. And we've seen this time and time again, is that if there's a stress situation, it's almost like we are unconsciously teaching people how to be. So if we've got a stressed leader and somebody who's on the tightrope and somebody who does not like or does not respond well to mistakes or faults or I don't know what to do, help me, that kind of thing, which again, a dysfunctional leader will create a dysfunctional team. When the team steps in to the threshold of their office, they will straight away adapt that kind of behavior. It's almost like an anchored response. So we have to be very, very careful as leaders. How are we showing up at work? Because people do what people see. They don't do what they hear. It's a monkey see, not monkey do. So teams don't mirror words, they mirror the presence. So most leadership conversations, and again, I've been when I work one on one with a leader, I will, depending on the kind of arrangement that we've got, but I have sat with people in their meetings, I've sat in their sales talks. I'm like sort of another person of the company, but I'm actually observing my client and I'm observing the whole conversation and then giving some feedback. And when I watch a lot of leadership conversations, they fail before the first sentence. They fail by their energy, by how what they think and what they expect. The expectations is already coming through. It's I teach a lot of communication, and it's interesting because I will teach this and then I go and I watch and observe and I still see the flaws. So what I teach is that 60 to 80% of communication is non-verbal, whereas 20 to 40% will be verbal. In other words, the words that we use. Okay. So if it's non-verbal, we don't realize when we are busy communicating with somebody how we are communicating and what are they reading. So I even teach the micro expressions of the face. And it's always interesting to me how much information is there that we are giving each other without being aware. So it's almost like you're talking with a wall between you and you're not listening to the words and you're not watching the face, you're not listening to the energy. And that's why most communication sentences fail before the first sentence. So what we do, and this is a natural thing that everybody does, human beings do it. You can't communicate without it. When we see information, when we experience life, we will delete information out of that. We will distort what we see because of the deletions it distorts, and we generalize information. And we have to do that. Otherwise, there's just too much to take in that moment. Now, we also do things consciously and unconsciously. So consciously, we can only look and focus at so much, depending on how new the information is. Unconsciously, we can take a lot more, but we still delete, distort, and generalize, which means that once we've had an experience, what we then have as memory is not the truth, but it feels like truth to us. So when we talk about it as if this is the truth, but it isn't really. Once you know this, then you know that what you're hearing is a deleted, distorted, and generalized information from the other person. You can start to become curious about what is missing in the information. So, what most people don't know is that language will reveal who we are and how we feel. When you study the language patterns, which is something, if you look at NLP, the L in NLP is for linguistics. And what Richard Bandler found is that when they were watching some psychotherapists back in the early 70s, some people were getting really, really great results and others were getting no results. There would be clients there for 10 years and they were still full of trauma and full of this and that and the other. So the question came in is like, why is this psychotherapist getting results and this one isn't? What's happening here? And he started filming and working with Virginia Satir, who's still known as one of the best family therapists ever. And he saw that she was unconsciously able to pick up patterns and therefore move a conversation through words. And she was able to understand that if somebody presents a problem this way, this is what it means. But if they present it this way, then it means this. And if it, and so on. So through the way that we unconsciously choose to talk about a problem, somebody can actually know what the problem is and how to solve it, which is actually brilliant. And I remember in one of the very first NLP pracs that I was assisting, that Richard said to the audience, in the first 5 minutes, your client will tell you what the problem is and how to solve it. And I went, wow, that's going to be amazing. And what I saw then with my client when I went back home is that after an hour and a half, I did amazing work, but I didn't know. I kept going. The client didn't really tell me what the problem is and how to solve it. How did Richard do it? So when I was watching him, it took me 3, 4 days of constantly watching to see what he was doing to prove that fact about what is it that a client tells you, and then how do you know what to do? And it was all in the language. It's the way people speak. Now, we already know how to react and respond because, I mean, you are whatever age you are and you've been communicating all this time. But what you maybe haven't realized is how much information someone, including yourself, is sharing with other people. And this is why people trust you, don't trust you, feel comfortable with you, or don't feel comfortable with you, are stressed around you, not stressed. All of that kind of stuff comes through your body language, your face expressions, the tone of your voice, and then the words that you use. It's all hidden in there, but it's in full sight. And it always makes me laugh because I can hear these things because I've been trained and I teach it. And sometimes when people get to know what I can do, they get scared to talk to me because they're going, oh my God, you're going to know what's deep inside my head. So it's a very interesting thing to be able to do. So good leadership is the reactive versus the conscious leader. So reactivity is always a sign of unconscious behavior. And I remember when I started supporting and assisting Richard Bandler and Paul McKenna, that somebody said to me that 95 to 97% of people are unconscious and therefore they act reactive. They are reactive in life. They're playing tennis, things come and off you're going. And I was like, come on, it can't be that high. 95 to 97% of people are unconscious and therefore they live a reactive life. Then I started doing all my freelance training around London and doing clients and trainings and things like that and talks. And unfortunately, that is true. And I don't know, it's 20 years since I've started my business here in the UK, and it's still true. Most people live a reactive life because they're living an unconscious life. So, part of creating the life that you want, to live life on your terms, in your dreams, to be able to have very, very successful teams, to be successful in your own business, in your own leadership position, is to go from being a reactive person to a proactive person by bringing up your consciousness. So doing the work is becoming conscious of what has been unconscious to you. And it's easy and difficult because we are built to be very useful. Can I say that as people? So once we've learned something, it becomes an automatic, habitual kind of way. So we don't have to think, for instance, how to walk. Whereas if you go back to and watch a child that is about a year old, the walking is a hell of a thing. And it takes a child around about a year to a year and a half to learn to walk. because they have to strengthen muscles, they have to learn to roll, they have to learn to do all sorts of things, and then they have to balance, and then they have to learn how to pull up the foot and not fall and put it for you know, there's so much in the whole walking kind of behavior, but I'm sure all of you now walk without even giving it a thought. So it's become an unconscious thing. So a lot of what we do, and it's good and it's useful, it becomes unconscious once we've learned it. But unfortunately, the way that we are emotionally reactive or emotionally behaving is also an unconscious kind of way, which becomes a habit. Reactions feel fast. So when people react, it's like a split second, whereas consciousness is slower. It's a pause, it's an assessment, and therefore it allows and creates choice. So when we are reacting, it will be instant. Like somebody will say something, and before they even finish, you start talking back or defending or explaining or doing something. That is a reactive kind of behavior. Whereas if you are conscious, you're listening, you're being attentive, you're allowing the person to finish, you're assessing what they're saying, and then you're coming back with a conscious, proactive kind of response, which is one out of choice. So being proactive means I am aware of me. The best thing that any leader can do, any manager, any business owner, is know yourself. If you don't know where you need to or how things are going to turn out. So when we ask ourselves, what has to be true for me to behave this way? So if I see a way that I behaved and then I kind of reflect back and go, that wasn't so good. If I ask myself the question of what has to be true for me to behave this way, it will start to give me clues as to what I think and feel and about myself. So I talk a lot about authorship, especially around leadership, begins with an interruption. So authorship is, who am I? We can look at it in a slightly different way. If we are sort of looking to understand Shakespeare's authorship, we are questioning whether Shakespeare has the qualities to be an author because he hasn't studied. So we are questioning his authorship. Did he write the plays? Was it him? Was that a fake name? Did somebody else write it and he was just the face because of his position? So we are questioning his authorship. So in much the same way, when we look at our authorship, I'm the author of my life. In other words, I create the life. I'm the creator. So it begins with the interruption of when I see something not working and I've questioned myself or what has to be true for me to behave this way. Now I interrupt that pattern that I don't want and I change it to something different. And the pause is where leadership lives. When you can just stop, take a breath, chill down, and then react, respond, answer. That's where leadership lives. Because there you can get curious. There you can kind of go, I've just heard something, but I don't have all the information. I'm aware of that, so now I'm going to ask. Or this sounds right. Maybe I didn't have something, I wasn't aware of something. My ego is intact, so therefore I can say, wow, yeah, I was wrong, and thank you for bringing that to my attention, rather than and the kind of stuff that I see and work with. So leadership isn't about becoming more, it's about removing the interference. So if you think about what I said right at the beginning of there's your identity and there's your behavior. Your behavior is the interference if it's not giving you the results that you want. There isn't any right way. There isn't anything that's good or bad or right or wrong. The only thing that you need to ask yourself is what I'm doing giving me the outcome that I want? That's the only thing that's valid. So if you're running a business and you're busy doing something, you can say to yourself, is what I'm doing right now giving me the results that I want? So for that, you need to have clarity. For that, you need to know where you're driving, where you're going, where you're being. If you're with a team and something's gone wrong, you can step away and go, is the way that this went what I want? Is this the outcome that I want? Is this who I want to be? And then when you see, well, no, if I could go back, I would choose a different way of being. I would choose a different way of behaving, a different something. That's what I would do. Then that's the interference that you need to work with. So I'm just going to stop sharing here. And my biggest question, other than any other questions that you may have from what you've heard, and again, this is just a taste, it's 30 minutes. I could talk about leadership and behavior and identity probably for about 30 days, if not more, constantly. So I'm just curious what's your biggest takeaway and any questions that you may have. And what you can do next, if anything here sort of was like, hey, you know what, I want to know more, there is the truth and shift sessions that I offer. It's not advice, it's not coaching. It's just a space where you can clearly see where authorship has been lost and how to restore it. We can just have this conversation and see where it goes.